One of the best kept kitchen secrets to making healthier food is milling your own flour at home. You can make so many of your favorite foods so much more nourishing and without much extra effort. Join me as I share with you everything you need to know when it comes to fresh milling flour. It's pretty mind-blowing, and once you see the power of it yourself, you will not want to go back. You guys know that I am all for eating real food to nourish your body, but as a busy mom, I do rely on certain key supplements to fuel me throughout my busy and demanding days. And I'm definitely picky about which supplements I choose to use in my routine, which is why I'm really excited to tell you guys about today's video sponsor, Ancient Nutrition. They are an excellent choice when it comes to high quality supplements. I especially love their grass-fed whey protein powder. Each serving has a whopping 23 grams of protein that is easy to digest, because the whey protein concentrate they use in their formula comes from A2 cows raised on American family farms that use organic and regenerative farming practices. It also contains eggshell membrane collagen, which has been shown in clinical studies to decrease joint discomfort, but also help with joint recovery after exercise. Eating enough protein is one of the best ways to keep your blood sugar steady and also just keep you feeling satisfied. But I also know that when you're busy, it can sometimes be a challenge to fuel properly. I tend to struggle in the mid-morning because it's the busiest time of my day, and when I get hungry, I don't really want to stop to eat. I just mix a scoop with some raw milk, and it is such a fast, easy way to get some high quality fuel in, which just helps me power through the rest of my morning. So if you guys want to try out their protein, you can use my discount code that will get you 15% off on Amazon. The code is 15Bristow, or you can just click the link in my description box below. If you are new to fresh flour, allow me to introduce you to one of the best kept kitchen secrets when it comes to making your favorite carb-rich foods like pancakes and pizza and bread and pasta and cookies and muffins, and the list goes on, so much healthier when these foods typically aren't considered health foods, right? So when it comes to flour is obviously made of grains, which you see here, which are packed with nutrition. So for example, they're loaded with vitamin E, there's tons of B vitamins in there, copper, zinc, magnesium, not to mention lots of antioxidants and phytochemicals. And then of course they contain carbohydrates as well as some protein and fats as well. But here's the catch. There is a time element here. So when the grains are intact, as you see here, they contain all of that nutrition and they're essentially preserved. But once you grind them up and they're exposed to oxygen, most of those nutrients will start to degrade, and this happens rather rapidly. So after about 3 days after that flour is first ground up, about 95% of those nutrients are lost. But here's the thing, when you apply high heat to the flour, aka you bake it, you alter the structure of the enzymes in that flour, and that basically renders them inactive. So that halts the degradation of those nutrients. So basically it quote unquote locks in that nutrition. Now, if you think about it, this is the same thing as like freezing to preserve food. In this case, the lower temperature will halt the enzyme activity. And that's why the fruits and vegetables not only won't spoil while they're frozen, but frozen fruits and vegetables, as we know, are basically have the same nutrient value as fresh fruits and vegetables because it gets preserved. So this is kind of the same thing, except instead of low temperatures, we're looking at high temperatures. Another time element here, and a question I often get, is what about when you ferment dough and you are essentially making sourdough because the flour is sitting out. So, I mean, when you think about it, obviously, yes, it will, because it's exposed to oxygen during that, let's say, overnight ferment or even like 24-hour ferment, it will lose nutrients because it's exposed to oxygen. However, sourdough, as we know, the actual process of fermenting the dough makes the nutrients more bioavailable, and then there's additional benefits to sourdough as well as far as digestibility goes. So the way that I look at it is I feel like it just kind of comes out in the wash. So whether you want to use yeast or sourdough, and I honestly have been fluctuating between the two recently, I feel like it just kind of evens out and is the same. So I feel like there's no reason to shy away from sourdough if you're using fresh milled flour. It's just kind of your preference. And you can also feed a sourdough starter fresh milled flour. It's another question I get a lot. You can start feeding it fresh milled flour at any time, and it will over time become, almost completely a fresh milled fed starter, I just feed mine with all-purpose because it's just super convenient. And I always do keep some all-purpose flour in my kitchen. I'm not fully fresh milled flour, and I can talk about that a little bit later. But basically, this is like a huge opportunity to infuse some of your favorite foods, like I said, bread, pizza, cookies, all of that, with so many nutrients, when typically that's just not the case, right? Now, I also want to talk a little bit about the cost of this. So obviously, if you want to start milling your own grains, you have to invest in a grain mill, which they are definitely an investment. I can link mine down below. I can also link a more affordable option that Nutrimill just came out with not too long ago, which would be an excellent way to get started at like a lower price point. But you do have to invest in the mill. However, once you make that initial investment, milling your own flour is going to save you a lot of money. In one of my more recent videos I shared about fresh milled flour, I talked about a cost comparison between a whole wheat loaf of bread that I had been making and buying like Dave's Killer Bread in the store. So my homemade wheat loaf cost me $3.85 when I did all the math, versus the Dave's Killer Bread at my grocery store was going for $6.69. So huge cost savings there, right? But also you have to understand that it's literally a different food. So it costs less money, but it contains far more nutrition. So just the store-bought bread, not only do I think it doesn't taste nearly as good, but you are paying significantly more money for far less nutrient value. So when I look at the cost comparison, it's just a no-brainer. As far as time investment, actually milling your flour, it takes very little time. It's literally maybe 3 minutes to mill it, to measure out the grains, throw them in the grinder. It grinds pretty quickly, at least if you're using an electric one like I have and not a hand mill. But it really does not take that much time. Now, if you don't bake any of your own things, like you don't bake any of your own bread or muffins or cookies or whatever, pizza dough, then, that obviously you're going to be spending time making things. But if you're already there, actually milling your flour is hardly any difference. So I did also want to talk a little bit about how I source my grains for all of the fresh milled goodies that I make. And I will link the recipes down below that I'm using if you guys want to see what I'm actually making throughout this video. But I just want to give you guys like a how-to because I've gotten so many questions, and I know that fresh milling flour can just be such a game changer when it comes to nutrition. So I always buy my grains in bulk. I buy them from Azure. I've always had a great experience with them. I know so many people buy their grains through Azure. Now you might be able to find a local mill to you, which would be the best option. I don't have one, so I'd always just buy from Azure. Now, if you're a beginner, I would say just get hard white wheat and soft white wheat, and you will be set as far as making pretty much anything under the sun. Hard white wheat is more for bread. It has a higher protein content. It's going to have more gluten, better rise. Soft white wheat, think of like your whole wheat pastry flour. So you can use this for scones like I did here, or muffins or cookies. And you can obviously do a combination of the two. And then later you could experiment with ancient grains like spelt and kamut and einkorn. But if you're just getting started, if you have those two, you'll pretty much be able to start making anything. I store mine in 5-gallon Gamma lid containers that are, made for food storage. And I just store them directly in there. I don't do anything in addition. Something to note, because you're dealing with whole, real grains, there is the possibility, and I know this grosses some people out, but it's a real food. All food is subject to, spoil and bugs and things like that when it comes from nature. It is possible to get something called weevils in your grains. This has never happened to me, and I've honestly never taken any extra precautions like freezing the grains first, or some people will put oxygen absorbers in the Gamma containers, or I've heard bay leaves, or even just sealing them in Mylar bags and then storing them in the containers. There's certainly more steps that you can take to prevent that. But again, I have just done it this quick and dirty, just store it in the container. And I've personally never had an issue. That doesn't mean I won't have an issue in the future, but I just wanted to make note of that. Now let's talk about how you actually bake. How are we actually using the fresh milled flour? Because it does not act the same as store-bought white flour that you might be used to. So basically, when it comes to using fresh milled flour, if you're a beginner, I would say get your grains, get your mill, and just start using recipes that are written specifically for fresh milled flour. I'm going to link a few different blogs down below, along with a Facebook group that is chock full of knowledge that will really help you when you're starting out. But if you're using recipes that are written for fresh milled flour, they're somewhat foolproof, and that will help you kind of get used to fresh milled flour and like how it works and how it's just a little bit different. You just get used to using it, just like you get used to using all-purpose flour when you learn to make bread. But if you're then going to start converting recipes, basically you want to look at weight instead of volume when you're trying to sub in fresh flour. So if a recipe calls for a cup of all-purpose flour, a cup of fresh milled flour is not the same. However, a cup of fresh milled flour is equal to 128 grams of berries. And I'm going to put a little chart here that you guys can screenshot that will show you. So if a recipe calls for half a cup or 2 cups, you can just use this conversion. So if, for example, if a cup or a recipe calls for a cup of flour, I will just mill 128 grams. Whether you weigh the berries first and get 128 grams, or you weigh the flour, as it's milling to get 128 grams, it's going to turn out the same way. It doesn't really matter. But you always want to go by weight instead of volume, because they're just not the same. Now, if you're starting out and you're converting recipes, something that I did was I just started doing if a recipe called for all-purpose flour, I would just do half all-purpose flour, and then I would sub the other half with fresh milled flour. I would not change the quantity. I wouldn't change anything around. I would just sub half the flour. And I have never had an issue with that. I feel like everything turns out great. So it's a good way to start getting fresh milled flour, like into your baked goods and really into your diet, without having to, it be this like stressful thing, your like learning curve. It's really very simple. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who get very, they can be purists when it comes to fresh milled flour. Like it has to be 100% fresh milled flour. Otherwise, what's the point? That is never how I look at nutrition. If there's half fresh milled flour in there, that is half chock full of nutrients, and it's far better than just all-purpose flour, right? So my bread recipe that my kids absolutely love is half all-purpose and half fresh milled flour. And they love it and they eat it. But when I make loaves, so far with all the experimenting over the last 6 months, when I make the loaves with just 100%, they don't really eat it. So it's like, it might be chock full of nutrition, but if it's not actually getting into their bodies, then what is the point? But if I can make it with half white flour and half fresh milled, they gobble it up. So I'll take that. Like that to me is a huge win. So you don't have to be a purist by any means. So if you're just kind of starting out, try half and half. And then from there, once you kind of get the hang of it, you can just start experimenting and using all fresh milled flour if you want, if you actually want the taste of that. Now, when it comes to, for example, this pizza crust that I'm making here, I recently tried out what some people call like an all-purpose flour substitute, where you do 1/3 hard white, 1/3 soft white, and 1/3 spelt or kamut wheat berries, and it turned out great and it was delicious and we really liked it. But sometimes I might do half white flour, half fresh milled. It's just one of those things where you can just kind of experiment and have fun with it, and it does not have to be perfect, but just knowing that you're infusing this fresh, nutrient-dense flour into some of your family's meals and favorite foods, over time, just think about how much that's going to compound and how much of a difference that's going to make. So if you're new to your journey, again, I will have lots of links for you down below to mills and blogs. I will link all the recipes down below that I used and try and, give you any details if I subbed how much flour I subbed or anything like that. But I hope that you guys found this video helpful, a little how-to, a little intro to fresh milled flour. Let me know if you have any questions down below. I would love for you to subscribe if you're new to my channel, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye.